There is a quiet kind of pain that does not scream. It lingers. It waits. It slowly takes over your thoughts. One-sided relationships begin with hope, with effort, with the belief that love given will eventually be returned. You text first. You call more, you care deeper. And at first, it feels normal. But over time, the imbalance becomes louder than words. You start noticing the pauses, the late replies, the lack of effort. Yet, you justify it. You protect the image of what you wish the relationship could be. Psychologically, this creates cognitive dissonance, where your reality and your belief clash constantly. You are emotionally investing while receiving emotional absence. This imbalance drains your mental energy because your brain keeps searching for meaning in something that lacks consistency. The hardest part is not the absence of love. It is the presence of hope that refuses to die. That hope keeps you stuck, replaying moments, analyzing words, and holding on to crumbs, as if they're enough to survive. One-sided relationships often feel like emotional addiction rather than genuine connection. You begin to crave small signs of attention, a reply, a smile, a moment of warmth, as if they are rewards. This pattern is deeply rooted in psychological reinforcement. When affection is inconsistent, your brain releases dopamine in unpredictable ways, making the attachment even stronger. It is the same mechanism that keeps people hooked on uncertainty. You wait longer, you try harder, believing that if you just do more, you will finally be chosen. This creates a dangerous loop where your self-worth becomes dependent on someone else's attention. You stop asking what you deserve and start asking what you can do better. Over time, you lose your sense of balance, because your emotional state is controlled by someone who is not equally invested. The relationship becomes less about love and more about chasing validation. And the cruel truth is, the less they give, the more valuable it feels to you, deepening the emotional trap. One of the most painful aspects of one-sided relationships is the exhaustion that comes without closure. You give your time, your energy, your care, yet there is no clear ending, no defined rejection, no honest conversation. This ambiguity keeps your mind in a constant state of overthinking. You analyze every message, every silence, every interaction, trying to decode what it means. Psychologically, humans seek patterns and conclusions, but here, there are none. This lack of closure creates emotional fatigue because your brain is working overtime to create answers that do not exist. You feel tired, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. It becomes difficult to focus, to feel present, to enjoy other parts of life. You carry this invisible weight everywhere. The relationship may not even be official, yet its impact is deeply real. And because nothing is clearly defined, you struggle to let go. You are stuck between holding on and moving on, and that in-between space becomes the most draining place to live. In one-sided relationships, you often fall in love, not with what is, but with what could be. You imagine a future where things change, where they realize your worth, where effort becomes mutual. This illusion of potential becomes stronger than reality itself. Psychologically, this is driven by optimism bias, where you overestimate positive outcomes, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. You ignore red flags. You reinterpret indifference as temporary, and you hold on to moments of kindness as proof that something real exists. The mind builds a narrative that protects your emotional investment. But this illusion comes at a cost. It keeps you trapped in a version of the relationship that does not exist. You begin to sacrifice your present happiness for a future that may never come. The more you invest in this imagined version, the harder it becomes to walk away. Letting go feels like losing not just a person, but an entire story you created in your mind. And that loss feels deeply personal, even if it was never real. Perhaps the deepest wound caused by one-sided relationships is the slow erosion of self-worth. At the beginning, you believe in yourself, in your rare value, in your ability to be loved. But as your efforts go unmatched, doubt begins to grow. You start questioning your worth, your attractiveness, your personality. You wonder if you are not enough, if you are too much, or if you are simply invisible. Psychologically, repeated emotional rejection, even subtle, can reshape your self-perception. Your confidence weakens, and you begin to internalize the imbalance as a reflection of your value. This is where the damage becomes long-lasting. It is no longer just about the relationship. It becomes about how you see yourself. You shrink your needs, lower your expectations, and accept less than you deserve. The most painful realization comes later, when you understand that you were always enough, just giving your energy to someone who could not recognize it. But by then, rebuilding yourself feels like starting from scratch. Letting go of a one-sided relationship feels far more painful than staying, even when staying hurts every day. This is because your mind forms an emotional attachment not only to the person, but to the routine, the hope, and the imagined future. Psychologically, this is linked to loss aversion, where the fear of losing something feels stronger than the pain of enduring it. You convince yourself that leaving means giving up on something meaningful, even if that meaning exists only in your perception. You replay memories, focus on rare good moments, and ignore the consistent lack of effort. The idea of starting over feels overwhelming, so you choose familiarity over uncertainty. But this fear traps you in a cycle where nothing improves. You remain emotionally invested in someone who is not equally present, slowly losing yourself in the process. The truth is, letting go is not losing them. It is reclaiming yourself. But your mind resists this truth because it is wired to hold on to what feels emotionally significant. In one-sided relationships, you often begin to give more, not out of pure love, but out of fear. You believe that if you care more, try harder, and become more understanding, the other person will eventually respond the same way. This behavior is rooted in psychological conditioning, often developed from past experiences where love had to be earned. You become hyper-aware of their needs, their moods, their preferences, while neglecting your own. Overgiving becomes your way of securing connection. You think that by being indispensable, you will be valued. But instead, it creates an imbalance where your efforts are expected, not appreciated. The more you give, the less they feel the need to reciprocate. This pattern is dangerous because it teaches you to associate love with sacrifice and exhaustion. You lose your boundaries, your voice, and your sense of self. True connection does not require you to constantly prove your worth. When you have to earn love repeatedly, it stops being love and becomes emotional labor. One of the most confusing experiences in a one-sided relationship is feeling lonely while being emotionally attached to someone. You are not alone, yet you feel unseen, unheard, and unfulfilled. Psychologically, this creates a deeper form of loneliness than physical isolation. Because you expect connection, the absence of it feels more intense. You share your thoughts, your feelings, your time, but there is no equal emotional return. Conversations feel one-dimensional, interactions feel incomplete, and your presence feels optional. This type of loneliness affects your mental health because it creates emotional deprivation. You begin to question whether your needs are too much, whether expecting reciprocity is unrealistic. Over time, you adapt to this emptiness, convincing yourself that partial connection is better than none. But this adaptation comes at a cost. It lowers your standards and normalizes emotional neglect. The hardest realization is understanding that being alone is less painful than feeling alone with someone who does not truly see you. Mixed signals are one of the most powerful forces that keep one-sided relationships alive. The person shows occasional interest, unexpected kindness, or brief emotional availability, just enough to keep you hopeful. Psychologically, this creates confusion and attachment at the same time. Your brain tries to make sense of inconsistent behavior, searching for patterns that justify staying. You interpret small gestures as signs of deeper feelings, even when their overall behavior shows otherwise. This inconsistency strengthens emotional dependence because you keep waiting for the good version of them to return. It becomes a cycle of highs and lows, where the highs feel incredibly rewarding and the lows feel deeply painful. This emotional roller coaster makes it harder to walk away because you're not only attached to the person, but to the moments when things feel right. But those moments are not the reality. They are exceptions, and building a relationship on exceptions leads to continuous disappointment and emotional instability. Over time, one-sided relationships begin to change who you are. You start adjusting your personality, your behavior, and even your emotional responses to fit what you think the other person wants. Psychologically, this is a form of self-abandonment. You silence your needs, hide your feelings, and avoid expressing discomfort to keep the connection alive. Slowly, you lose touch with your authentic self. You become someone who is always available, always understanding, always guiding, even when it hurts. This identity shift is subtle but powerful. You no longer recognize your own boundaries because they have been repeatedly crossed or ignored. Your happiness becomes secondary. Your voice becomes quieter, and your presence becomes conditional. The relationship starts defining you instead of complimenting you. The most painful part is realizing that in trying to keep someone else, you lost parts of yourself. And rebuilding that identity requires unlearning the belief that love means sacrificing who you truly are. One-sided relationships often create a false sense of movement, making you believe things are slowly improving. A slightly longer conversation, a quicker reply, a rare moment of affection. These small changes feel like progress. Psychologically, your mind clings to these moments as proof that your efforts are working. You begin to measure growth based on minimal shifts instead of consistent behavior. This illusion keeps you invested because it feels like you are getting closer to something real. But in truth, the foundation remains unchanged. The imbalance still exists, the effort is still unequal, and the emotional gap is still wide. Your brain highlights these rare positive experiences while ignoring the overwhelming pattern of neglect. This selective focus creates a narrative where staying feels justified. You tell yourself that patience will be rewarded, that time will fix everything. But real progress in relationships is not occasional. It is consistent, mutual, and intentional. Without that, what feels like progress is often just temporary relief. As the relationship continues, you may find yourself becoming emotionally dependent on someone who does not fully show up for you. Your mood begins to fluctuate based on their attention, their responses, and their presence. Psychologically, this dependency forms when your emotional needs are partially met but never fulfilled. It creates a constant craving for more. You start relying on them for validation, comfort, and a sense of stability, even though they provide it inconsistently. This dependency weakens your emotional independence because your inner balance becomes externally controlled. You wait for their messages to feel better, their approval to feel worthy, their presence to feel complete. Over time, this creates an unhealthy attachment where your happiness is no longer self-generated. The more dependent you become, the harder it is to detach. You fear losing them not because they give you everything, but because they have become your primary source of emotional regulation. Breaking this cycle requires rebuilding your ability to feel whole without their involvement. There is a unique kind of pain in realizing that you are not a priority in someone's life, but merely an option. You are there when it is convenient for them, when they need attention, when they feel lonely, but not when it truly matters. Psychologically, this triggers feelings of rejection and inadequacy. You begin to question why you are not chosen consistently, why your presence is conditional. This creates an internal struggle between what you accept and what you deserve. You may try harder to become a priority, believing that more effort will change your position in their life. But being treated as an option is not something you can fix through effort alone. It reflects their level of investment, not your value. Yet the emotional impact is deep. It makes you feel replaceable, invisible, and uncertain about your place. Over time, this erodes your confidence and makes you settle for less. The truth is, real connection does not make you compete for attention. It makes you feel secure in your importance. Hope is often seen as something positive, something that keeps us going. But in one-sided relationships, hope can become the very thing that prolongs your pain. You hope they will change, hope they will realize your worth, hope they will start showing up differently. Psychologically, hope acts as a coping mechanism, helping you tolerate emotional discomfort. It gives meaning to your suffering and justifies your patience. But when hope is not grounded in reality, it becomes a trap. You ignore clear patterns, overlook repeated disappointments, and hold on to possibilities instead of facts. This keeps you emotionally invested in something that is not evolving. The longer you hold on to this hope, the deeper your attachment becomes, and the harder it is to let go. You are not just attached to the person, you are attached to the belief that things will get better. And releasing that belief can feel like losing everything at once, even when it is the only way to heal. At some point, there comes a moment of clarity, a quiet realization that something is not right. It may not happen suddenly, but it builds over time through repeated disappointment and emotional fatigue. Psychologically, this is when your awareness begins to override your denial. You start seeing patterns instead of excuses, reality instead of potential. The things you once ignored become impossible to overlook. You notice how much you give compared to how little you receive. This awakening can feel painful, but it is also empowering. It shifts your perspective from seeking their validation to questioning your own choices. You begin to understand that the relationship is not lacking because of you. but because it was never balanced to begin with. This realization creates a turning point. You may not leave immediately, but something inside you changes. You start valuing your peace more, your time more, and your emotional well-being more. And that shift is the beginning of breaking free. One of the deepest pains in one-sided relationships is grieving something that was never truly real. You are not just mourning the person, you are mourning the connection you believed in, the future you imagined, and the love you thought was growing. Psychologically, this creates a complex form of grief because there is no clear loss, no defined ending, only a realization. You begin to understand that much of what you held on to was built in your own mind. This does not make the pain any less real. In fact, it often makes it heavier because you feel like you lost something intangible. You replay moments, searching for proof that it meant something, that it was not all one-sided. But healing begins when you accept that your feelings were real, even if the relationship was not mutual. Letting go means releasing the story you created, not just the person. And that process takes time because you are untangling yourself from something that existed both in reality and imagination. After experiencing a one-sided relationship, one of the most important steps is learning to rebuild your emotional boundaries. During the relationship, those boundaries were often ignored, stretched, or completely abandoned in order to maintain connection. Psychologically, this leaves you vulnerable to repeating the same patterns, if not addressed. Rebuilding boundaries means learning to say no, to recognize when effort is not reciprocated, and to step back when something feels unbalanced. It requires self-awareness and courage, because setting boundaries can feel uncomfortable at first. You may fear losing people or being seen as difficult, but boundaries are not about pushing others away. They are about protecting your emotional well-being. They define what you are willing to give and what you expect in return. Over time, strong boundaries help you attract healthier connections, where effort is mutual and respect is consistent. They remind you that your energy is valuable and should not be given endlessly without care or acknowledgement. The pain of one-sided relationships is not just about loving someone who does not love you back. It is about losing yourself while trying to be enough for someone who was never fully there. It drains your energy, confuses your mind, and slowly reshapes how you see your own worth. You begin with hope, you stay with patience, and you leave with lessons that change you deeply. But within that pain lies a powerful truth: awareness. Once you see the imbalance clearly, you can no longer ignore it. You begin to understand that love should not feel like constant effort without return. It should feel like mutual presence, mutual care, and mutual respect. Walking away is not failure. It is growth. It is the moment you choose clarity over confusion and self-respect over emotional attachment. Healing takes time, but it rebuilds you stronger, wiser, and more aware of what you truly deserve. And in that awareness, you stop chasing love and start recognizing it when it is real.